Good morning and welcome. My name is Ken Roberts. I'm the president of WorldCity. We're going to wait just a minute or two to let everybody populate the webinar. It takes just a minute for everybody to get in. We'll begin in just about a minute or two. Got a great program this morning. It's going to go fast. Got a lot of ground to cover. Got some great speakers. Good morning. I'm going to go ahead and get started. As I said, when a few of you jumped in earlier, my name is Ken Roberts. I'm the president of WorldCity. You're welcome to WorldCity's Philadelphia Trade Trends in conjunction with the World Trade Center of Greater Philadelphia, sponsored by Seaboard Marine and supported by the City of Philadelphia, PhilaPort, and Philadelphia International Airport. We have 4 speakers today. Well, I'm one of them. Linda Conlin is going to make some comments in just a moment from the World Trade Center of Greater Philadelphia. Jim Tyrrell is the Chief Revenue Officer at Philadelphia International Airport and sit-in for Shelley Cameron, who the CEO had to pull out just at the last minute. Jim's going to do a great job, and he and I spoke yesterday. We were able to set that up. And also, we're glad to have Jeff Theobald, the Executive Director and CEO of PhilaPort, on the call as well. So you've got some real experts here. Real quickly, for those of you who don't know me, and that would probably be a lot of you, in addition to being president of WorldCity, I write a column 5 times a month for Forbes.com on international trade. I just completed my second 2-year term on the Federal Reserve's Trade and Transportation Advisory Board, a great group of about a dozen people who provide input to the Federal Reserve on what they see going on in the trade and logistics space. WorldCity takes U.S. Census data and populates our website, ustradenumbers.com, which you'll see shortly, with all sorts of data on every airport, seaport, and border crossing in the country, more than 200 countries and so forth. And we publish trade numbers products for more than 20 markets around the country over the years, including one for Philadelphia. We release Trade Matters videos weekly, where I talk about issues on trade, and then I speak on international trade to Fortune 500 companies, national and local trade organizations, and more. As I mentioned, our sponsors, in addition to us and World Trade Center of Greater Philadelphia, we have Seaboard Marine as a sponsor. We could not have done the event without the World Trade Center of Greater Philadelphia, because they helped push this out. But in addition, we had partners with the City of Philadelphia, Philadelphia International Airport, and PhilaPort, the Port of Philadelphia. If you have questions at any point during the presentation, there is a little Q&A tab you can click on and add your questions there. It's better to put the questions in there. There's also a chat feature you can use as well, but the questions are best there. You can ask them at any time you want during my presentation, during one of the presentations of either Jeff or Jim or Linda for that matter. We'll try to get to them as we can, but we will have a little time at the end, we hope, to answer questions as well. So as I mentioned, WorldCity produces annual trade numbers publication, and this is an example of US trade numbers. They are newly redesigned this year. We've been doing these since 2001, is when we did our first trade numbers publication. This year was the first time we did a major overhaul, and really load them with colorful infographics and essential trade data. There's really wonderful data visualizations, as you can see with the big illustration on the right there. That particular illustration on the top shows the top 20 US trade partners, top 25 US trade partners. The size of the circle represents the volume of that trade. They're colored by continent and so forth. And on the bottom, you can see the trajectory of the top exports and imports. On the left-hand side, you can see the top airports and seaports around the country. So, the digital data visualization really helps tell the story really, really well. Now I'd like to introduce Linda Conlin. Many of you know her. She's the president of the World Trade Center of Greater Philadelphia. She's responsible for increasing the impact and contribution of the organization. She's generated a record total of $1.7 billion in export sales. She served as a member of the board of directors as well as vice chair and first vice president of the Export-Import Bank of the United States, which is a tremendous responsibility. She worked as assistant secretary for trade development with the U.S. Department of Commerce, former executive director of New Jersey's Commerce and Economic Growth Commissions, and she's held positions at U.S. Travel and Tourism Administration, U.S. Department of State, and the U.S. Information Agency. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Linda. And Linda, again, thank you for all you have done to help us put this event on. And I should say that if you are not a member of the World Trade Center, you should consider it because it does a tremendous amount for the community in Philadelphia. We do events around the country. We've done webinars just in the last 6 months in California, Texas, here in Florida, where I am. And I'm familiar with World Trade Centers, and you've got a good one in Linda Conlin and the World Trade Center in Philadelphia. Go ahead, Linda.
Thank you so much, Ken, for those kind remarks. The World Trade Center of Greater Philadelphia is proud to join you and WorldCity for this timely update on Philadelphia's trade year to date, as reflected in the trade coming through the Port of Philadelphia, as reflected in the trade that is handled by Philadelphia International Airport. Together with Ken, I want to welcome everyone who is participating in our virtual event this morning. We're fortunate to have Ken and WorldCity with us again. As his bio indicates, Ken has spent 2 decades analyzing, writing, and speaking about trade data, as he would say, trying to make it interesting and relevant, and indeed he does. Ken, it was in June of 2019, a year and a half ago, that you joined us in Philadelphia in person to launch the inaugural publication of trade data on PhilaPort. Well, needless to say, the world was quite different at that time. I don't think either of us could have envisioned a world crippled by this global pandemic and the disruption to the global economy and trade that ensued. So today, I am pleased to provide you a warm virtual welcome, Ken, to Philadelphia. I'm also pleased to join my partners and colleagues, Jeff Theobald of PhilaPort and Jim Tyrrell of Philadelphia International Airport. Many of you know the World Trade Center of Greater Philadelphia, but for those of you who may not be familiar with our organization, let me just make a few brief points. For the past 18 years, we have been focusing on bringing growth and prosperity to businesses, largely exporting businesses, communities, and neighborhoods in Greater Philadelphia through global trade and investment. And we do this by providing exporting companies in southeastern Pennsylvania and southern New Jersey, individual trade counseling, educational programs and conferences, and connections to customers worldwide through our very extensive network of World Trade Centers in some close to 100 countries around the globe. Well, the past 10 months have been challenging for the 300 to 400 companies that we work with on an annual basis. Some have struggled, yet many have proven really resilient, pivoting to new markets and product lines in response to COVID-19. Throughout this time, as an organization, our focus has been on keeping our companies informed, engaged, and prepared to enter best markets of opportunity as the global economy improves, and in so doing, helping our region's economy to recover. Because as you've said many times, Ken, because trade matters. Before we were hit by this global pandemic, Greater Philadelphia had approximately a $32 billion export economy alone, supporting thousands of good, higher paying jobs. The fact is that we do make what the world needs and wants, and nothing could be more demonstrable of that or evident then the focus on life sciences and healthcare that has been the focus over the past few months, and where Philadelphia really has a leadership role to play. So I thank you for this opportunity, Ken, to partner with you and with Jeff and with Jim this morning. I look forward to your presentation and to the discussions.
Thank you very much, Linda. And we'll go ahead and get Jim's bio back up on the screen here, and I'll introduce Jim. Jim oversees the Chief Revenue Officer for the airport, Philadelphia International Airport. He oversees the revenue generating functions at the airport. That's air service development strategy, develops marketing, branding strategies to support air service destinations, the airport concession program. He's worked as Deputy Director of Aviation, oversaw the airport's concession program at that time as well, and the leasing of 2 new terminals, assumed leadership of the air service development program. Former airport property manager and supervised several property specialists performing property management and business development activities. And he graduated with a bachelor's degree of science in marketing management from St. Joseph's University. Jim he's a native Philadelphian and has spent quite a number of years at the airport, so he really knows it cold. Without further ado, I'm going to jump in with Jim and start. We had a wonderful conversation yesterday, as well as one I had a week or two ago with Shelley, about the tremendous opportunity that you have there at the airport. And before we get too much into this tract of land you have to develop, why don't you fill us in on where PHL is, where the airport is today relative to other airports in the region?
Hey, good morning, Ken, and good morning, everyone. So Philadelphia International Airport, as it pertains to cargo, essentially really underperforms compared to some of its other East Coast gateways. And primarily, I'm referring to the 2 airports to the north of us, Newark and Kennedy. We have very much benefited from our geographic location, and really we've attracted cargo surely by accident. UPS developed a hub here in Philadelphia in the mid 80s, and an unknown, a really little known piece of information is it is the 2nd largest UPS sort facility in their system. It's only 2nd to Louisville. So it is a pretty big facility. So Philadelphia has really benefited from having that facility here at the airport. But the majority of our cargo is really handled by our passenger aircraft. And when US Airways and then American established their transatlantic gateway here in Philadelphia and started flying wide bodies across the Atlantic to Europe, they carried tons, literally tons of cargo in the bellies of those passenger aircraft. And about 60% of all of our cargo throughput is handled in the bellies of passenger aircraft. And so we always knew we had a pretty significant cargo opportunity in Philadelphia. We didn't know exactly what that opportunity was until we commissioned a study back in 2017. And this mid-Atlantic region, based on the results of that study, led us to understand that it accounts for about $53 billion each year of air cargo import and export activity. That's a lot of activity. And the study also pointed out to us that Philadelphia only handled about 9% of that. 70% of it went right by the front door of the airport up to our airports in the north, Newark and Kennedy. So we realized that we had a tremendous opportunity here, and we could provide a real benefit to the shippers in our area if we were to be able to accommodate them in terms of facilities and airlift.
Jim, thanks for that. And I just noticed someone has raised their hand. If you can ask your question in the Q&A, we can try to get to those questions. We're happy to do that anytime. Some of you joined after I probably mentioned that. So if you have a question you want to ask at any point, just throw it in the Q&A queue and we'll get to it. You can also use the chat if you want, but Q&A is what I've got open and I'm sort of looking for questions. So yeah, so let's now talk about, you made one point, and I know a number of people are aware of this, but there might be a few people on the ocean side who don't know this. You mentioned that about 60% of the air cargo handled at Philadelphia is in the belly of passenger planes. The other 40 would be what's called charters, which are all cargo planes. And that's fairly typical of most airports, I think, around the country. There's some exceptions, but that's a pretty typical, and that will come up later when I look at some of the trade data and you can see some of the changes that have occurred. Let's talk about the property then that you've got and I mean, to me, it's an incredible opportunity and could be really transformative for the Philadelphia air cargo community. So why don't you say what you got there? And yeah.
Sure. So a little over 2 years ago, the airport acquired a 135-acre parcel of undeveloped land just immediately to the west of what is known today as Cargo City, the cargo area at the airport. So it's strategically positioned in an area that is already conducive to cargo activity. There are a couple of enabling projects that we have to accomplish before we can actually begin to develop this area. And one is to relocate an existing roadway that bifurcates the parcel from the airport. So we have to relocate that road around the perimeter of the parcel. And we also have a pretty significant wetlands mitigation program in effect right now, so that it will enable us to develop the entire 135 acres of this parcel as cargo facilities. We think this is a phenomenal opportunity. It has great access to not only I-95, but also I-76 and I-476, which are the major highways that connect you to north, south, east, west, and all of the different parts of the region. I mean, I mentioned the geographic location of Philadelphia International. We are positioned in such a location that you can be in 3 different states in a matter of 15 minutes. You can be in Maryland, New Jersey, or Delaware, literally in a 15-minute drive from this particular location. So strategically for shippers, it's phenomenally situated. We have done some preliminary layouts for this site, and currently we're evaluating what the best opportunity would be for not only the airport, but for the region. We have layouts that show a single user for the entire 135-acre parcel, where we could develop over 1 million square feet facility and accommodate over 30 wide-body aircraft parking positions to support that facility. We could also—
And let that number sink in for a second. 30 wide-body aircraft at one time on this parcel. I mean, that's just, think about that.
That's a lot of cargo.
That's a lot of cargo. Yeah, and so we were saying you could build one large,
So we could develop it for a single user, or we could do multiple users, smaller facilities, and accommodate up to several different facilities that make up that 1 million square feet of warehouse space, and support the same number of wide-body aircraft parking positions. But so we're currently in the process of evaluating which opportunities would best serve the airport.
Terrific. And how are you going to make that decision? I mean, I tell you what, one thing we haven't mentioned is I think Stephanie, who works with you, put together a group of people to advise or to offer input. Why don't you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's really important.
So after commissioning the study, Philadelphia made the decision we were going to get into the cargo business very actively. So the first thing we did was we went out and hired an air service developer and cargo services development expert, Stephanie Ware, as you mentioned, Ken. And she has come in and she really hit the ground running we hired her in February, a month before the pandemic hit. So she has really hit the ground running. And one of the first things she did for us was to develop or initiate a Philadelphia air cargo community group. Currently, it consists of about 45 members. It has members from all of the different parts of the cargo industry. We have airline representatives, ground handling representatives, developers, you name it, we have it in our council. And we are now putting together a strategy that is looking to develop short-term and long-term plans to really kick off our cargo development opportunities.
Yeah, and when you think out into the future, when do you see this property being, I don't know what the right word will be, fully developed or operational? How do you see that playing out? Do you have a timetable for that yet?
We do. So actually the short-term goal is to take existing cargo warehouse, redevelop them, reposition and repurpose the current activities that are going on in those warehouse facilities that are, again, supported by half a dozen wide body aircraft parking positions that we can make available to a developer, a ground handler, or possibly a user, whoever's going to bring us that short-term activity that we're looking for. The longer term has us looking to develop the 135 acre parcel in a little over 2.5 years. That will give us time to relocate the roadway, complete the wetlands mitigation plan, and really get into some infrastructure planning and design opportunities so that we are ready to develop the parcel when the time comes.
So possibly sometime in 2023 is, and it's hard to imagine that what you now see as a parcel being totally built out and the opportunities it holds.
It really is. And by the way, I'll mention, we have an environmental process that has been underway for now a little over 16 months. And that environmental process is coming to a conclusion, anticipated to be in February, that will give us the opportunity to really go forward and think about how we're going to develop this parcel.
Yeah, and I guess pharma could play a role in that, in the whole medical space, right?
So think about the cargo activity that's going on today and has been for the last 9 months. We've had aircraft coming in filled with PPE and different things to address the pandemic. UPS just started delivering vaccines through Philadelphia yesterday. So the other side of that is Philadelphia is strategically located in the heads and meds center of the United States. I mean, if you're not in education, you're in medical. And whether that's in pharma, whether it's in the medical equipment service area, yeah, we look to ship a lot of high air cargo out of this program.
Yeah, and you'll see this in some of the data I'm going to get to after Jeff speaks about PhilaPort. But if there's any questions for Jim that you did not get a chance to ask while he was speaking, feel free to still put them in the Q&A folder there. We'll get to them at the end, if not before. But I want to thank you, Jim, for your time today and for updating people on the study. I do think, I mean, again, we do these presentations around the country, and there's probably not an airport in this country that wouldn't give their right arm for 135 acre plot right adjacent to the airport where they are. I mean, there's few airports that can have that kind of land, maybe it's with the possible exception of somebody like DFW or something, which is nothing but land in Texas. But most airports are so constrained, and you're obviously in a very populated area. So it's amazing to have that kind of a track to be able to build your future on. So it's really terrific.
Agreed. Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it.
Thanks. So I'm going to now bring Jeff Theobald on. He's the CEO of PhilaPort. And in that position, the executive and CEO, and obviously in that position, he provides the leadership and direction for PhilaPort's major projects, including the Delaware River Main Channel, the deepening and widening, the $300 million port development plan, direct state-of-the-art terminal operations, and complex international supply chains. And it's funny that the word complex is there, because if you know anything about international supply chains, it goes without saying that these things are complex. So it really is an amazing responsibility and opportunity. He's the former president and CEO of Ports America Outer Harbor. He worked as senior VP of global operations for networks and terminals for APL, and he's provided consulting services with maritime, ports, terminal, and transportation sectors over the years. With that, I'm going to bring Jeff onto the screen, and we'll talk a little bit about PhilaPort. Good morning, Jeff. Thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. And first, let me thank you, Ken, from WorldCity, as well as Linda from World Trade Center, for allowing PhilaPort to participate in this event today. We always appreciate the opportunity to speak about our port, because there's a lot of good things happening here. So thank you.
Sure. So I'm going to ask for the first question. I think we have a slide to go with this. As we talked, there were some areas that came up where you said I can bring a slide. So why don't we talk about your cargo volume compared to other East Coast seaports this year. And as we all know, it's no surprise that it's been a very, very challenging year for most airports, seaports, and border crossings around the country. There's roughly 475 of those around the country. And I should mention that PhilaPort is an important player in that market. But let's look at this chart and tell us what it shows us.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's right. There it goes. Okay. So right now we're well above the East Coast. You'll see everybody else. The U.S. trade this is the container business only, is down 4% year to date. There was a major impact, as everybody's aware, with the COVID especially on the West Coast and anything coming out of Asia. So we were very fortunate, and we were happy with our performance so far. Not only did we, maintain what we had during this crisis, but we also continued to grow the business. So we're quite happy with the growth. I think right now we're still looking, even with only a 6% growth year to date now, we'll probably be looking at a double-digit growth again over the last 5 years. So we're quite happy with that growth on container business. Just touching a couple of the other verticals real quickly, the key ones for us, like forest products, the pulp and paper products, again, that's up 11% year to date. All the demand that you saw from for napkins and paper towels and diapers that came in since March, I mean, all that's coming through, imported a lot through the pulp business coming through Tioga, as well as the paper rolls and stuff down in Penn City terminals. So we have good increase on forest products. And then the one downside kind of we have is autos. So come autos, we just built a new auto facility for Hyundai and Kia. We're quite excited about that. We just opened that in October. And then, 3 months later, the COVID hit us. All the dealerships closed. Nobody was buying cars. And so the volumes dropped dramatically. Fortunately, in the last 2 months, the autos actually have increased dramatically. And I think we will actually almost get right up to where we were last year and kind of be flat on the growth area. So we're quite happy about that recovery we have on the autos. That's kind of where we are in volumes right now. We're quite happy. We're still looking for more. We've added a lot of capital to increase the capacity of the facilities, whether it's break bulk or containers. And so we're happy to continue to grow that area.
Yeah, and so, and this chart that we're seeing now is container growth year to date, by the way, and
Right.
That's through October. And the data I will look at the end of this presentation will be also through October, which is the most current available. But I'll be looking at dollar value primarily, as well as some tonnage. So we'll see some difference in the story it tells. But these are some really impressive numbers given the situation that most seaports, particularly on the East Coast, but most seaports in general, in which they find themselves. What about, I know a big piece of the work you guys do at PhilaPort is perishables. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? And I think we have a slide that can accompany that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think the perishable business has probably been historical business for Philadelphia. I mean, it's probably been going on for 40, 50 years at least as a key hub. Most of our business is perishable. I would say of the container business, 70+% of our business is related to the perishable business. And, as most of that is north-south, that's probably why we didn't have a big impact from COVID. People still want to eat. So, all the fruits and vegetables and meats, they're coming in through Philadelphia continued, and it continued to grow also. And I think, again, going back to something Jim said, I mean, this is a location. This is the best place to be for this type of business. You got 40 or 50 million people within 100 miles of this place. You have expert people on the stevedoring side, and the terminal side, the warehouse, the trucking side, all who have been doing this for generations, and they know how to satisfy the customers. And we're going to continue to build on that expertise through additional infrastructure improvements.
Yeah, and if you keep this map in mind, when I get to my data later on, I'm going to be talking about some of these some of these little images you see here, the grapes and the beef and so forth, some of the citrus. So you'll see some of these in the data that I show you as we get on down the road here. So why don't we run through the infrastructure projects? I know it was, I believe, $300 million you had that to work with, and let's talk about what's happened with that and what you've accomplished and what's still to come, and maybe even a little bit of what you would like to do if you can find somebody else with an open wallet.
Yeah, well, the good news is, or good or bad news, I've already spent the $300 million. So
Okay.
We have finished the channel deepening with the Army Corps, and of course, the state of Pennsylvania was the non-federal sponsor of that, and they put in $150 million, and the feds were in about $400 million. So we're just doing the clean activity of that. So now that was deepened, that allows a lot bigger ships to get through the Panama Canal. They can now get to Philadelphia. We then went into the $300 million investment. We rebuilt the Packer container berth. The last portion of that, it'll be finished in the first or second quarter of 21. So it's 3,000 feet of new berth that was reconstructed in order to handle the newer cranes, the heavier cranes. And speaking of the cranes, we've added 5 new super postmanus cranes, can handle the biggest ships in the world today. And hopefully we'll see those coming up the river. We've also demolished some warehousing activity on Packer to increase container capacity. And in the process of breaking ground on a 260,000 square foot warehouse, dry warehouse near Packer, probably in December this year, we'll be breaking ground on that. We also spent about $150 million on our auto facility. It's the 250 acres of auto for Hyundai and Kia, for a vehicle processing center there. It's the only place on the East Coast that's above the 100-year floodplain that we built. So there's no issue with that issue going forward for 100 years or whenever. So they're quite happy with that development. It's state-of-the-art VPC, vehicle processing center, that was built. We also added new warehouses up in Tioga already for pulp, and that kind of drove the increase in pulp business that we've seen, that we mentioned earlier on today. So that's kind of what we spent the money on already. Going down the road, we already have plans and have discussions with the governor about additional capital infrastructure improvement money, as well as federal money. We still want to improve the road infrastructure around the port area to make sure we're working with the PennDOT on the I-95 to make sure we have access to and from the port that's compatible with the business we're trying to do. Warehousing is still very, very important. We'll be looking at building additional refrigerated warehouse near dock for more perishable business. We're looking to acquire land, because for us to grow, we need to have more land. So we'll be acquiring land through various means to build more container capacity, more warehouse capacity. And the last kind of key issue for us is to develop intermodal. So we have CSX intermodal today. NS is not really there. And we need to have 2 Class 1 railroads available to our customers in Philadelphia. So we are pushing and working very hard to develop options to deliver new intermodal near dock to Packer Avenue. So those are kind of the things that we're working on going forward, and they're kind of on our radar right now.
And why, I'll ask you a sort of obvious question, but just in case, why does intermodal help?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of discretionary cargo that moves, over Baltimore today, over New York, and we can grow our business that way. So whether it's going from Philadelphia, just a short run to Pittsburgh area, Ohio Valley, maybe on rail, takes trucks off the streets, improves efficiencies in that manner, or we get more into Chicago and more intermodal runs to get us our hands on the intermodal cargo. It adds volume to the ship. If the ship's coming anyhow, they can put the intermodal cargo on, creates jobs for sure on the stevedoring side. So we're very much interested in being able to provide 2 Class 1 services to our customers.
Okay, and I've got a question from in the queue here, and I'm going to read it. And if Jeff, you want to take a crack at it, and James, if you want to as well. And this was from a few moments ago. Of course, we focus on U.S. exports, which boost GDP and create jobs, but imports also create jobs through fulfillment and value-added processing. Imports from Africa are part of the U.S. government strategy under the African Growth and Opportunity Act and Prosper Africa. Here's the question: to what extent is the handling of imports a part of the overall Philadelphia trade plan? And Jeff, if you want to take a crack at it, and Jim, if we can bring Jim back on, that'd be great. And if he wants to take a crack at that as well.
Yeah, for us, I mean, the import to us, I think everybody knows, in most places in the United States, I mean, the import to export is about 4 to 1.
Right.
So we're very much focused on import, and we do a lot of business in West Africa on the cocoa side. But clearly, yeah, I'm trying to grow the exports also, because I need to match back. I need to have a reason why a shipping line will come to Philadelphia. He has the imports. We need to get backhaul and get more exports. So we encourage anybody on the phone that controls export business to please think Philly first. Yeah,
this is one of the challenges. If you send an empty container back, it's not jingling the cash register quite as well as you would like.
That's right.
Yeah. And Jim, you got any comments there?
Yeah, I mean, just like Jeff said, it's really important to fill the plane on both trips, especially when you're talking about belly cargo in passenger aircraft, because they're making a round trip anyway. It's not like a charter coming one way, so you really want to fill those. You fill those bellies on both directions. But the good news for us is we have this pharma area, and we have a great deal of not only chemicals, but medicines and pharma related product coming in from overseas. So we're very focused on the imports as well as the exports.
And happy to take any other questions for Jeff or Jim before I begin my presentation. If anybody has them, jump right in. But even if anybody else has one during my presentation, feel free to jump in as well. At this point, I want to thank Jeff and Jim for their comments. well received, good information. I'm going to now jump in and walk you through some data from our website, ustradenumbers.com. Let me get that. Up on the screen here. It'll just take just a second. And we're going to go to the right page, not the Zoom page. There you go. This is, give me one second. This is again, ustradenumbers.com. This is our website. We update it once a month. This data that you're seeing here on the screen is available for everyone every month for every airport, seaport, and border crossing around the country. It's important when you look at these numbers to consider what you're looking at and how they compare with what you just heard. And what I should say, because the number in the upper left-hand screen is a little bit disconcerting, that's just for the month of October, and it's comparing to the previous October. And we're going to talk what happened, but the number that I want you to focus on as well is just below that, compared to the month of September, right below that, it shows that trade is up 1.45%. compared to September, and it's up 7.3% on exports and down slightly still on imports. Let me show you what's going on there if I could. And again, if you have questions, it's harder for me to see the questions, so Tatiana will sort of bump me if I have any questions here. But a couple of things I think are worth noting what happened here. So this shows you the top trade partners for Philadelphia International Airport through October. And again, this is census data, and it's through the month of October. Underneath this colorful chart here, you can see there's 3 time categories: 2019, the current month, and this is now looking at year to date. You can do value or tonnage here, as you see on these buttons on the bottom as well. So Germany, United Kingdom at the moment handles the most trade with Philadelphia International Airport this year by the value of that trade. Now let's watch what happens when we click on 2019. Italy jumps to 20, and as you remember, if you looked at just again a year to date, it was down to 9%. So something has happened here with Italy, right? So now let's go look at the imports. And by the way, Philadelphia International Airport, like a lot of airports around the country, its trade is much more balanced than you're going to see at seaports. Seaports trade tends to be less balanced because, particularly for measuring TEUs or tonnage, the heavier things that come in the big boxes or in bulk, we don't export those things because we're not big in the raw material world. We're much bigger in finished goods, and a lot of what we export is high value, often lightweight, and can fly just as easily as it can sail. So here's the imports, and we're looking at 2019. Okay, so this is medicines. You heard Jim talk about meds and heads. The pharma industry, if you look at it, medicines, individual doses, this is the main category of sort of pills, if you will. Then there's plasma and vaccines, and there's some other chemicals. There's some chemicals we'll get to in a minute, but watch what happens when we switch to year to date. Medicines, individual doses goes down to 27%, okay? So if we look down on our website, and this shows all the various ports. This is actually sort of interesting too. If you look at, here's 2019, 61% of Philadelphia's trade by value was an import, and 39% was an export. If you go to year to date, it gets closer to balance, we'll call it, but watch what happens in the month of October. Suddenly you've got this massive imbalance towards exports, and that's largely because something happened on the import side, and I'm going to show you what that is. This is a story that accompanies every month. And if we look at Italy, trade with Italy, I'm going to highlight that so you can see it. Trade with Italy fell almost 71%. Has fallen year. This is now year to date. Has fallen year to date. And let's look at the import side. Here's medicines and individual dosages down 63%. So what has happened here, and this came out of the conversation I had yesterday, is during the pandemic, Italy was very hard hit, right, by the pandemic. And so flights between Philadelphia and Rome came to a standstill. And that's where apparently a lot of those medicines were coming from. And so that's what really happened. So I'm going to flip to another page here. And this is those medicines and individual dosages. And so year to date, they come from United Kingdom, 30%. If you look back to last year, almost half were coming from Italy. Okay, so you've seen a big switch in that. Okay, and if you look at PhilaPort handling 2% year to date. You go back, this is PhilaPort here, as you can see it. I'm sorry, not PhilaPort, Philadelphia International Airport, 2% year to date. Last year, that number was 6%. So this is what happens with trade sometimes. Something that's totally out of your hands, out of your control, can totally change the picture in how trade is occurring at your port. So let's look at the overall. Here's medicine's individual doses, not down that much actually, okay? 3.08% in October. Philadelphia's were down 79.18%, okay? So big drop, and that's the story. And then we have a page just on Italy here. And I have all these tabs open so the presentation goes a little more quickly. If you look at Italy, okay, Italy, and you don't see this on your screen, but medicine's down 37%, okay? The exports of medicines to the United States were down 37%. So you can see it's not just a Philadelphia International Airport story, it's what happened within the global economy. Let's now look at a couple of, I'm gonna go back and look at a couple of stories that are much better stories. Let's look at this one. This is plasma, vaccines, and blood. It's a large category that includes things like white blood cells and obviously vaccines and plasma, up 43% this year, okay? And then I'll look at these last two, nucleic acids and salts, up 32.9%, and heterocyclic chemical compounds rose 46%. Those last two might not be common household items, but those are often largely used in the pharma industry. So they're the products that are used to make pharmaceuticals. So now let's see if I can get to the right screen. Here's plasma and vaccines and blood. And these can be fairly fluid markets as well. So here's year to date, 72%, this is into Philadelphia Airport, by the way. 72% of those are coming from Germany this year. Last year's a different story. So these things can move around without significant change in the value of those things, okay? And as you see back at the top, you saw from the previous page, the change in that category was quite significant. So Germany has become a much bigger player in that category, okay? And this shows you, again, this shows you Philadelphia. If I can find it on here somewhere. It's sometimes hard to find them. Well, I lost you. There's the port of Philadelphia. There's the airport, 2.6% in 2019. And if you notice, it literally didn't change much from year to date to 2019. So Germany came in and became a much bigger player in that space. Let's move on and let's look at the overall category. So up 27% in the month of October. This is the country now. This is all imports into the country. And as you saw, the imports into Philadelphia were much bigger than that. Philadelphia's were 43% just in the month of October. And now Philadelphia International Airport ranks number 9, okay, with Germany moving to number 1, as you saw in the previous slide. But here you can see Philadelphia International Airport ranks number 9. O'Hare is a big player in this, and you'll be hearing about O'Hare in the COVID-19 vaccines. You'll be seeing a lot of those coming into Chicago and moving around the country. So that'll be big shipments in. And because UPS is going to be such a big player in this, I would expect, given UPS's role at Philadelphia International Airport, you will see a lot of those vaccines come in through Philadelphia as well. So let's look at this other category here, this heterocyclic chemical compound, something I can't tell you much about other than I know it's often used in the pharma industry. So UK, let's watch this. Let's look at 2019. You can't even see the United Kingdom. It's over here at less than 1%, and boom, now 67% year to date. This is how supply chains can change in this industry, and this is why particularly the air cargo side can be very fluid and can move very quickly on where things are sourced from and where they come to and where they go from. And so Philadelphia, you can see here on as well. Here's Philadelphia here. Year to date was 3.4%. Last year, if I can follow this green as it moves, there's from 2.4% now up to 3.4%. So gaining market share in that particular category. And then one last one here for the airport before I get onto the seaport. And these are these heterocyclic compounds. They're actually down across the nation. Okay, so Philadelphia up 46% year to date, just for on a year to date basis for the U.S. for heterocyclic compounds. The drop is only about 4%, but Philadelphia International Airport way outperformed in this particular category, and that's sort of the nature of the business. Now we're going to switch over now, and we're going to look at the seaport. Okay, here is Port of Philadelphia. Okay, you may recall that the decline at the airport was much more significant, and this is what Jeff was talking about. Because of the lack of Asia trade, it's actually been sort of a bonus for PhilaPort. Trade only down 4.3%, 4.38% compared to October of last year. And this year, more than any year that I've been studying trade data, I've tried to look at 1 month and compare it to the same month the year before, because I wanted to compare it against a year when there was no pandemic. Even with that, there can be some noise and distortion in the numbers because there can be blips in previous years and so forth. But you can see, looking back to the September numbers, very healthy growth. And this is what you're seeing across the country. The worst month for most of us in the international trade arena was probably May, and some April and some June, but May, that time period was really, really tough for most ports around the country. Yeah, let me look at that. Now I'll show you how you can also use our data to, so this is, let's look at the trade. This is last year. South Korea, and that's going to be a lot of cars. Australia, we'll get to that, but that's going to be a number of things, but we'll include beef. And then Germany. But if you switch to tonnage, you can see another role that PhilaPort plays, and that's in the oil space. And that's going to, you can see up over the energy space in general. You got Brazil, you got Russia, you got Canada, Colombia, some of these other countries. But in terms of the value of that trade, South Korea is actually gaining a little bit of ground this year, and that flows with what Jeff said on the automotive sector coming back. Is more of those Hyundai and Kia cars. And by the way, I should mention that some of those cars are going to be coming not just from South Korea, but will come from, will presumably come from other markets, because they're also manufactured in Mexico as well. Some of those currently go to Jacksonville. This will show you some of the leading exports and imports. Let me see where there was one other thing I wanted to show you here. This should have, yeah, we looked at this, I think, already, but this was the tonnage by countries. That's where you see the Saudis. Yeah, we looked at that. Okay. So here's a map that just sort of shows you the various exports and imports that come in by value, and this is year to date. So LNG and other petroleum gases, isocyclic hydrocarbons, scrap iron and steel, medical instruments. Here's the first perishable item, that's pork. And that is an export from PhilaPort. Then you got the plasma and so forth. If you scroll down, and PhilaPort, as we were talking about earlier, is skewed heavily towards the import side, just given the nature of what occurs here. So here's the passenger vehicles accounting for 15% of the total value year to date. All of last year, that percentage was 13%, followed by oil. And here you've got frozen beef is now number 3, cocoa beans, medicines, medical instruments. This is on the port side. So the airport handles a great deal of this pharmaceutical, medical kind of stuff, but so does this seaport. If we switch to tonnage, it tells, of course, a somewhat different story. Oil is about 1/3 of the total tonnage, with gasoline another big piece of it. Then you got bananas and so forth. So let's look at some of those. Earlier in Jeff's presentation, he showed off some of the perishable items that move through PhilaPort. But let me just give you a sense of how important PhilaPort is in that arena. So where do those frozen beef imports come from? 76% are coming from just 2 countries, Australia and New Zealand. But if you look at last year, it was 83%. So what's opening up, and you saw it a little bit on the map that Jeff showed, Argentina now 5.6%, Brazil 4%, even Nicaragua. And I live here in Miami, by the way, and we know that a lot of beef comes from particularly Argentina and Nicaragua into our market because we have large populations of people from there. And here's one that I think is helpful for everybody to look at. Port of Philadelphia, PhilaPort has handled 48% of all frozen beef imports into the United States this year, almost half of all imports, okay? And that's a really, really impressive statistic for PhilaPort. Now let's look at the cocoa beans.
And you do have a question, Ken, when you get a
Oh, good, okay. Yeah, I can't see the questions in this format, so do you want to read it to me, or can I?
Sure. Air travel
Yeah.
from the EU changed significantly in 2010. Therefore, transportation was limited comparing 2019 to 2020 is important. However, 2020 should be viewed as an anomaly. Yes or no?
Oh, yeah. This one, I think this is, if there's a bigger word than anomaly, I think that's the word we'd look for. This is, I went back when this whole thing started. I'll give you the good news of this, okay? When this whole thing started and the pandemic started, I thought, oh my God, this is going to be a crushing blow. So I went back and I looked at the mortgage crisis of 08, 09 and what happened then. I looked at 9/11, what happened then to trade. And it looked like to me that overall US trade would drop somewhere around $1 trillion, from about $4 trillion to about $3 trillion. The good news is it's only going to drop probably into the range of $3.5 trillion. That's still a $500 billion loss. It's an enormous loss. But the US economy has remained remarkably resilient, and you can actually see it in some of these perishable numbers, because some of the perishables around the country have continued to do quite well. But yes, to call it 2020 an anomaly is an understatement. It's really been, what it has proven to me, and I presume to Jeff and to Jim and many of you, is that the supply chains that have been set up in the international trade community have proven remarkably resilient. When there has been a problem with, for example, I just went to buy a dishwasher over the weekend, and I sort of found the model I liked, and the gentleman popped in his computer and said, we can have it for you in April. And I kind of looked at him like, what? Like, I'm talking about the one right over there. And he said, well, we don't sell floor models, but we're backed up anyway. We can't have one till April. What we're having is, the problem is there were some delays on the manufacturing side because workers in some of these, whether it be Mexico or China or Korea or Vietnam, wherever it might have been, were finding it very difficult to keep their workers at work because of the coronavirus. But trade overall has been remarkably resilient, particularly in the perishable space. So it's hard to say it's been a good year in any way, but trade has done better than I had expected when the year started. Hope that answers the question. So here's the cocoa beans, and Jeff mentioned that 62% come from Côte d'Ivoire, which always trips me up. And let's look at it. It's about 70% last year so far. And I believe these are somewhat seasonal, but let's look again at where those come in. PhilaPort PhilaPort is 3/4 of all those imports into the country, which is a pretty amazing statistic there as well. And I know we're running a little bit short of time, so I'm going to try to scoop through some of these pretty fast. Here's this, I don't like necessarily the name of this, is also the category. This is essentially lamb. We'll call it lamb. In Australia, 76%, New Zealand, 23%. If you do your math, that's 99%. So that's where it's sort of coming from, and very little from elsewhere. And if you look at where it comes in again to the United States, almost 2/3 come right into Philadelphia. Okay. Let's look at grapes now, okay? That was also on the illustration that Jeff had there. So traditionally, you're looking at 96% from 2 countries. That would be into Philadelphia, into PhilaPort. That's Chile and Peru. About the same last year. Interesting enough, when you switch it to the current month, you get 97% from Brazil. That, my guess is, and I'm not an expert in this, my guess is that's going to be a seasonal question. If you look now around how they all come into the country, this is one category where PhilaPort does not rank number one, but ranks number two to Nogales border crossing in Arizona. It's obviously a border crossing with Mexico. And that margin has shifted just slightly, and that some of that could be growing season related, I'm not sure. But you see that you have grapes coming in from Mexico as well as from South America. All right, so you saw there was frozen beef. Now there's also fresh beef. For whatever reason, the U.S. government on the meat categories doesn't divide. Oh, this is imported grapes. So I guess that's there you go. Let's go to here. This is the fresh beef. Again, now I moved essentially to Australia. It was 92% last year. It's 90% this year. Seeing a little bit more from Uruguay and Argentina, some of those countries we mentioned, as well as New Zealand, Nicaragua. And here's one. This is the only chart I can think of that I can show you that will show sweetgrass border crossing in Montana is ranking number one in the country in anything. Obviously bordering with Canada, and that's fairly consistent. But as you see in Port Laredo, again, a border crossing, and that's with Mexico, obviously. Then you see PhilaPort at 13%. And I'll show you sort of an interesting chart that we have also. This can be a little tricky to read at first, but as you see how far this extends to the outer circle, that means most of the fresh beef that's entering the country is entering through a border crossing. And if you look at this one, which doesn't go out very far, this is going to be largely PhilaPort. And then on airports, there's not fresh beef on the airport there. And I can show you one real quick. This one I'm going to show you, and you have to appreciate this is just in development stage, so it's not pretty looking yet, but we've created something that we're working on now that will show you where PhilaPort ranks number one or ranks wherever. So we can rank it by value, we can rank it by weight, and these are all the categories by value where PhilaPort ranks number one: frozen beef, honey, fresh apricots, cherries, peaches, and plums. Lamb we talked about, cocoa beans we talked about. On Jeff's chart, he showed apples and pears. I didn't get to those, but ranks number one. Grapes I showed you as well. So a lot of, and you can do it by weight as well as by, so if I click this button, I have to click it twice. It's gonna want me to resubmit. So we probably are gonna have to pass on that. But I can do the same thing for PhilaPort as well. So I'm gonna stop my screen share right now. I'm going to always pop it back up. And if there's any other questions for me or for any of the panelists, this would be a great time to ask them. We try to run our trains on time, and it looks like it's coming up on 10 o'clock right now. But I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody might have. And if there are none, we'll go ahead and go to those last few slides, Tatiana. And I apologize if I went through that too quickly for any of you, but I hope you got a lot of it. And again, the website is ustradenumbers.com. These are the publications we do. You can go to our website, ustradenumbers.com, and you can download PDFs of any number of these publications at no cost. We will mail you a printed version at a marginal cost, but these are available as downloads at our website. And as I said earlier, they're loaded with colorful infographics and essential trade data, and I think that will be proven true. And once again, I want to thank the World Trade Center, Greater Philadelphia, Linda Conlin and her great staff, Dino and Graciela, for all their help on this. They did a tremendous job for us. Seaboard Marine, which supports us here in Miami and around the country. And we absolutely could not have done it without the city of Philadelphia, without PhilaPort, and without Philadelphia International Airport. Thank you again to all our sponsors for all that support. And if you want to get in touch with us for any reason, ustradenumbers.com, I think you got that by now, but you can reach us by telephone at 305-441-2244 here in sunny South Florida. I'm also available on my website by email at kroberts@ustradenumbers.com. And a great way to keep up with what I'm up to is to either follow me on LinkedIn or on Twitter. Those are the two social channels I spend the most time with. And I don't think we have any other questions. So I will say to everybody, have a great rest of the week. And have a great rest of the week and have a great holiday. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Linda.
And Jeff and Jim.
And Jeff and Jim.
Yes.